Hello and welcome to the Animation Essay Podcast. I'm your host, Julia Smutslow, and this month I'm honored to bring you what I think is an important and timely conversation about the future of the animation school, the respected tertiary institution that's been such a vital part of the animation ecosystem here in South Africa for the quarter century of its existence. The school recently dealt with quite a violent reaction on social media when they announced their intention to integrate AI workflows into their curriculum. Founder Nuno Martins joined us along with advisor Tim Argall to explain what that does and doesn't mean, and why they firmly believe that exposing students to AI tools is the best way to serve them. Please enjoy. Thanks for joining Animation SA today to talk about this very hot potato topic at the moment, which is, I'm sure, occupying a lot of your brain space, both of you. I'm here with Nuno Martins, founder of the Animation School, and Tim Argall, what's your official position, Tim?
That's an excellent question. Nuno and I still have to figure that out. At this stage, really just support to Nuno, and we are trying to bring some of my experience to the table here from a curriculum point of view, definitely working with the staff, and hopefully lots of interaction with the students so that the standard of the school can just continue improving.
So you'll be working with Kelly very closely, I imagine, and Nuno's back in the mix also. Working closely again with everyone, Nuno, or more of a presiding from afar?
No, definitely in the thick of it. More than ever, I would say, or at least in the past few years. Yes, because there's this change that's affecting every department from application right through to graduation. So we are all super, super busy trying to research and solve and nurture and explain and challenge, and so it's been the toughest part of my 26 years at animation school.
Yeah, well, I think it's really laudable that you've taken it on, as because it's a paradigm shift and it needs leaders, and especially leaders for young people who are the most affected by this kind of thing because they just don't have a toehold yet. And I think both of you really couldn't find two people who clearly care more about young people coming into the industry. Tim and Candice have gone out of their way to make space for young people, take them on, take them in, and train them both in Joburg and with Bugbox Cape Town. And then you, of course, Nuno, I mean, with my students, with Draw for Life, to make a space for people to be exposed to a professional environment, to just make it possible for them to see themselves in the animation industry. So I don't think there can be any question that your hearts are in the right place when it comes to nurturing the youth. So I can understand it must have been very difficult for you when your initial announcement of experimenting with AI tools got quite a bit of a backlash, I think, fair to say, mostly from students and ex-students, perhaps also a little bit of industry. But while there was some very practical support for those ideas, clearly also emotions are running high when it comes to this topic.
I think our objective from the start was to prepare these graduates with skills. I studied in 1994. I had a great experience as a student. I learned a lot. It was mostly kind of software based. But when I met my first employer, there was a big gap in my skill set from what the institution taught me to what the studio owner needed from me. And what I realized was that I was an operator. I just knew how to operate the software at the time, and that's in the late 1990s. That's what we needed to learn, was these new tools. And again, it was the same thing we're going through now. And then I got offered an opportunity to teach very young. And then I started developing courses where we weren't just focusing on the software, but rather on the output. What are they doing with the software, adding in more production skills? So long story short, our objective was always to service the industry with skilled animators. Because when I chatted with some of these professionals when I opened animation school in 2000, a lot of them were critical of what we were doing because all the other schools weren't really offering, the skill sets they needed to build an industry. And that's why we faced industry quite head on. And I think the challenges we're having now, maybe with alumni and students, in the early 2000s, it was with industry. They were incredibly demanding of us. And also because they compared us to international schools and they were saying, look what these international schools are doing. Look at the quality of work they're doing. Look where they're ending up. So we didn't rest until we got to that skill level. And that was really the objective. And again, now we are doing the same. We are talking to industry. They're telling us to be curious, and they're telling us to at least start understanding this new tech, and that's essentially what we're trying to do. We don't have all the answers. We also never had all the answers in 2000. I think it takes time for these things to settle. The only difference now is communication is very fast. So, if I mention something now, within 5 minutes, 1,000 people have heard what I've said. In 2000, you'd have to go to the newspaper, write a letter, hopefully it gets published. And so it was easier to calm the masses then. Now there's a lot of noise, and there's good and bad about that. The good is that you don't become complacent, and you don't live, in your own ego. You constantly know, people are around you, and that people have different needs, and that you need to adjust to that. But yeah, it's been tough.
Listening to Nuno, we've walked this journey with him, the 26 years of the school as industry, and been one of the voices saying, you guys should be doing this, and you should be doing that, and you should be teaching this, and what about that? And I was conscious coming in a sort of more full-time capacity with the school, that I would be now on the other side of that argument, and hopefully have a lot of insight. But something I didn't consider taking on this role was that we actually have to think 3 years ahead, because you're bringing a student in, and they leave the system in 3 years' time, and so what are you going to teach them that's going to prepare them for what the world looks like in 3 years? And back in the day, it was fairly formulaic. Even not that long ago, we knew what industry's demands were. We knew which applications the students needed to be familiar with. And there's already a tension between, should we teach Maya? There's studios that want us to teach Houdini. The advertising community keeps saying Cinema 4D. And then there's a big sort of voice that's saying we should embrace Blender. And, can the students take in all of that stuff? And if you try and teach all of that stuff, then effectively all they do learn is software, and not necessarily the skills they actually need. But as I stepped into the role, the first thing that was on the radar was, well, where does AI fit into this picture, and what's it going to look like in 3 years' time? And so this whole conversation began right at the beginning. How can we responsibly send students away with the diploma in 3 years without trying at least to imagine what the world's going to look like? And of course, we don't know, because of how rapidly it's moving. And I remember saying to our mutual friend Stu Coots, we need to be teaching AI. And he said, well, your curriculum is going to change every 3 months. And so that's what we've had to do. We've had to design something, essentially buckets that we can experiment in order to at least track with what's happening. Mark Bloch, who's ran Black Ginger for a long time, he said, you're going to be throwing them to the wolves if they're not prepared. And in many ways, I think that's happening even now. There's so many animators who are currently open for work on LinkedIn, and students that are emerging with their sort of traditional skill sets. And we're trying to work out how to close that gap. I think that whilst it's contentious, sure, and there are lots of things about it that I don't like, it seems like the responsible thing to do, to bring it in and to sort of scrutinize it and expose its underbelly. Can it do what it says it can do, and use the school environment to do that?
I'd love to hear more about these buckets, as you called them, since the software is going to change all the time. And alongside that, I think the legislation is changing and taste is changing. You can't always follow industry pressure if it's going to morph so quickly. So perhaps one of the places to start would be to teach the students how to learn and how to discern what is good work, and make sure that the software is not running you, like you're the one running the software. I liked Cory Doctorow's recent metaphor of Master and Blaster from Mad Max. Like, who's the tool and who's the brain.
Absolutely.
And with artificial intelligence, you really have to wonder who's the brain to keep the students in the driving seat. So there's a couple of pillars to it. There's like which approach has the most utility, then there's which one has the most creative merit, and then there's which one is most ethical, and then which one is winning overall. With a mix of those things, what are we seeing globally in industry, what the appetites are? I mean, Dan, for instance, had a story recently of a client who said, was very keen to find out, what are you guys doing to integrate AI into this production? And then a couple of months later, they were saying, rather, please don't integrate AI into this production, because suddenly copyright and legislation is catching up. So you can't rely on industry to tell you what you should be doing. I think what I'm hearing from you also is that you have to have that faith in your own stance as a school, and the ability to teach basic principles. And I mean, I listened to quite a few of the interviews that you guys did for your open day. And I like that message coming through very strongly from artists who've been at it for a while, is to train the eye, train the habits of observation and curiosity, which is, I think Stuart said, the most important tool you can have is curiosity. I mean, that's not something that any software suite is going to give you. Also picked up from one of the interviews that what you're looking at more than prompt-based AI is node-based. So it's integrating tools into workflows that are the same workflows
Correct.
you would have had to master as a traditional student. Do you want to just, either of you, talk about that a little bit to make the distinction clear?
I'll take that, Tim, if you don't mind. As you know, being in the industry as long as I have, software was always our biggest bottleneck. If you speak to any studio owner, they'll tell you that software was always in the way of us achieving our end goal. And we would abandon certain shots and certain scenes because we just couldn't do it. It was just impossible. Only the likes of Pixar and Disney that had huge budgets could spend a couple more millions on a shot. And that would definitely take the wind out of our sails, and especially for students, because they would come in with this enthusiasm that they want to do what Pixar's doing. And they couldn't understand, because we are using very similar software. And we would have to kind of suppress their ideas in so many ways. And that's why when AI came along, we were excited about it. So initially, I realized that prompting's not going to work, because it was one prompt, you're getting one result, and in that result, you have everything in there. You have that layout done, you have the character set up, you have the animation done, you have the lighting, you have the pace, you have the energy, everything in one prompt. So when you wanted to make a change or reiterate, it was very difficult, because every time you reiterated, the machine would change something else, and then it would fix the one thing in the scene, but then break the other thing. Then there wouldn't be consistency, then there'd be drifting. Then I started talking to industry, and I think it was Mark once that said to me, probably about 2 years ago, look at Comfy UI. And as soon as I went to go look at Comfy UI, I discovered that this is probably the next step in production of animation, because with node-based AI, you are able to control every facet of the shot. So that means you can control the character separately, you can control the background, you can control the lighting, everything. And you can add to that. So I think we're still going to discover new nodes and new ways of controlling small little subtleties, like maybe just the eyes or just the eyebrows. And that's when the epiphany hit me. I realized, okay, here we have now a pipeline that fits our existing workflows. So then when I started chatting with industry, they were all adopting that. So if you look at Netflix's incubator, very similar to that. It's a node-based system. Promise Studio that uses Muse, very similar system, node-based. You can control everything. And we're seeing some amazing results from that. So I just didn't make the decision, let's go node-based just for the sake of it. I most certainly did the research and asked people that were already using the tools. And I think that's where a lot of my frustration is with AI, is that I have a number of people questioning us and challenging us, but they've never really used the tools. So we believe node-based is the way to do things now. We believe it will be able to slot into our curriculum. And we want to be clear that the only thing that we're manipulating in our curriculum are the tools. So I'm a little bit more brave than the rest of the team, because I want to drop like long-standing software packages. I want to drop them because I feel that they won't be around in 2 or 3 years. And if they are around, they will themselves have so much kind of integrated AI, whether it's procedural or whether it's generative, it's going to be embedded in the software. So artists of the future, if they decide to not pursue AI, it's going to be very difficult for them to find tools that they're going to be able to work with, because we're seeing it with Adobe's introducing a lot of stuff. Blender's taking a huge stride forward in terms of bringing APIs into Blender. Maya's also introducing an entire overhaul. Coming back to the node system, we want to use a product called Comfy UI, which is open source. In first year, we're going to govern the use of AI quite aggressively because we want them to adopt all the principles and the theoretical stuff. So we're only manipulating the tool side of our curriculum. Everything else, the principles, the foundation, color theory and cinematography, everything remains the same. In fact, we feel that we can spend more time now developing the creative concept than going back and forth, because the craft isn't going to take as long as we anticipate. But having said that, when I talk to artists that have been using these tools, they are telling us that they've never worked harder, that they've got 10, 12-hour days now, because the product is so reliable that there's almost kind of this addiction to just keep going and keep going and keep improving. And because you've got that instant result, then it's quite dangerous in a way. Where in the past, we would hit render and come back the next morning, and then you'd find that only 3 frames rendered because that's how you set it. Then you'd realize, oh, I have to re-render this whole thing again. So where now I think there's going to be a lot more room for us to be creative.
I'm glad to hear that you're thinking along the lines of keeping this for second year and third year and introducing craft principles in first year. Just a funny analogy came to mind. There's a prominent boys' school in Cape Town that I won't name, but who's famous for their having a really good rugby ground game. And I heard it's because they don't let them kick until whatever it is, grade 10. They don't let them kick so that they develop a good ground game. And it's a similar sort of thing. Like maybe your ground game as creatives will be really strong if you don't let them play with those tools until they've really mastered those basics. I've had a little look around at what other schools are doing, and I think there are similar trends elsewhere. I know you've got a close relationship with Emile Cole and Gobelin, and I think the French schools, particularly, as one might imagine, are very keen on protecting the artistic excellence that they've always fostered in their students, and part of that will surely mean not letting them play with those tools until they've covered the basics. I wanted to ask, though, just a couple of things that came to mind off the back of that. Would you want to offer the opportunity for students to not use those tools and say, I've done my movie in a traditional way and graded accordingly? Or is the Comfy UI workflow going to be the workflow offered at TAS, and you expect all students to follow it, which I can imagine also would make it easier to grade stuff?
I was just going to say it's possible that it will regulate itself in some ways because of the expense of the tokens and the kind of pressure it'll put on the hardware. And so we've been talking about using it as astutely as possible and doing a lot of careful planning before executing. And I think that that discipline will come down to helping artists think like artists, as opposed to not really think and then wait for a result and then let the result guide them. And so this sort of segues into something else in terms of how we plan to grade the work. But I think certainly from my perspective, it makes a lot of sense for the artist to work out what they want to say and stylistically what they how they plan to present what they want to say, and to define that very well by hand, and then work out how to manipulate the tools to achieve the results they're setting out for. And so I think in that way, we do get this sort of, well, I forget the master and the blaster logic that you used earlier. That was the terminology. We get the relationship right to the tool, where the artist has an intent and they are working on achieving that intent, and that's how they grade it. How closely they get to what they set out to do, as opposed to, and this happened even with 3D software. You know, an animator's animating, but you can't get the rig to do what he wanted it to do, so he ends up doing something else, or the software interpolates it in a certain way, and it's like, oh, that actually looks kind of cool. And then you get sort of floaty, weird animation as opposed to an animator who has a very clear intent. So I think, those ideas will definitely apply completely to the way artists are engaging with the technology. I think Nuno might have a slightly different answer to me. I'm just looking at his expression, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I totally agree, Tim. I totally agree. I think that it is important for us to govern, the tools, because they're so reliable now, and because you can get an instant result. Artists can easily drift away from their original idea, because the generative stuff is so fascinating in terms of this quality that it offers you really quickly. And I appreciate it more than the Gen Zs, because we've been in this for 30 years, and we've been fighting software quite literally for 30 years. And so when we get these instant results, then artists can kind of drift away from their original idea, and we're going to go back to forcing them to come up with their concepts first, and really developing the idea first before jumping onto this tool. Because if we don't, their projects, their concepts aren't going to look anything like their projects, because we're going to get results that are fascinating and work, but it's not really what the client might want, and not really what in line with the brand, or in line with the story, and in line with the energy. So that's why we're making sure to keep the artist at the center, that the artist communicates what they want. Those of us that are more experienced, we will challenge these new tools, and we'll say, no, that's not what I needed. This is what I needed. And you'll see that it actually does start giving you better results and understands you. For your first question, in terms of will we allow students to go the traditional route, I would reluctantly say yes. And entirely traditional, I would rather encourage them to do more of a hybrid approach, and not let them walk the pier, and say, look, you really are, you're going to reduce your opportunities significantly. It was like students that joined the school, many years ago, and were adamant on doing stop motion. And I would say to them, look, it's fantastic. You've got 2 or 3 studios worldwide that are really doing it at a high level. And so you really have to be the best at this. If you want to do this, then maybe don't join animation school. Go and apply at these studios rather, because that's not what we're going to teach you. And I still believe there's a market for everything. So what we are doing, Julia, officially, is that even in 3rd year next year, we are going to give them the option to do both. So what our academic team is developing at the moment is a possible parallel system, where they still have to commit to their films. I think everyone knows what our films look like, and what extent we go to produce the quality films that we do. And that is a pipeline very similar to any other big studio around the world. And I'm still fascinated that our lecturers are capable of producing, up to 20 of these films per year. Most of them technically perfect, really beautiful films. So we're very proud to have reached that pinnacle where we're able to just churn out these stories quite easily now. And industry always give us raving support. So what we're planning to do next year is we're adding a parallel stream where students will be encouraged to do a smaller project entirely in AI. And that's just a bite-sized thing. And why are we doing that? Because industry is telling us we want to meet candidates that have the traditional skills, the traditional understanding of animation, but are also curious about AI and how AI could help them become better artists. And that's why we're doing it. And personally, I cannot wait to see those projects, because I think it's going to boost the energy of the students. I think the confidence levels at the schools are going to increase. We have a substantial portion of our student population that do go into a dark place when they can't achieve things because the technology's been in their way all this time. And we keep saying, oh no, it's this product and that product. And it's because 20 steps ago, you messed up one thing. So now you have to go back and repair everything from like 3 weeks ago. And so that has been very disheartening. So we want to kind of manage this new technology in a way that's going to empower the artists, give them more ability to do things. Like I've said with third year, I've always wanted our characters to have more voice to have more lip syncing and to have conversations between characters to really add value. And we've had to suppress that because we just didn't have the time, the technology, or the money to do that. And now I feel we could possibly change that. We could possibly have, films with just more substance.
It's interesting that you say you've got students that go to a dark place because of traditional tools. My son Frank, who's 8, volunteered some thoughts on AI. I didn't even ask him, but he's also a filmmaker. Well, he's starting to learn filmmaking. And he said, "Mommy, I've noticed that you're talking about AI more than you used to." And I said, "Well, what do you think about AI, Frank?" And he said, maybe I'll drop the audio in here. I managed to catch some of it on audio.
I think if you use AI to help you too much with things, it'll like sort of hypnotize your brain like this. And then AI will tell you your brain what to do.
So would you use it to make a movie, Frankie?
Yes.
You would use it to make a movie?
I would use it to make a movie if I got very stressed and I didn't know where to go. I'd only use it if my darkest moments of making my movie.
Did you say your darkest moments of making your movie?
Yeah. And why are you recording me?
Very wise, very wise.
That's quite similar to what you were saying about students who go to dark places. And the second question that came to mind was what you said about the students working 10 or 12-hour days, not because they're struggling, but because it's so easy and in a way it's addictive to get results so quickly. And we've seen recent legislation in other countries to protect young people in particular from addictive technology like social media. Will you be keeping a close eye on that side of things, the science around cognitive effects on students?
We're most certainly going to keep a close eye on that. We have 2 counselors that are super busy, and in fact, been fielding a lot of emotions now in terms of this my announcement with AI, and it's tricky. But again, being such an optimist, I really hope that it's going to bring more positivity into their workflow. We're obviously going to be talking about the risks and the ethics and authorship. All of that's very important to us. And we need to manage that very, very carefully. And in terms of their abilities going forward, I think it's going to improve their creativity. I was having a chat with one of our alumni. He graduated in 2008. I've been mentoring him for about a year because he was fascinated with AI. And when I see his progress of what's happened in a year, it's been astounding. And he's now been contacted by top studios. In fact, started work yesterday at a top studio doing a lot of AI stuff, but really quality work. And he said to me, "I've never been more creative." He's got like 18 stories that he's written throughout his life that he can now start exploring. He's now gotten to a point where he's like, now I can really do this stuff on my own. And one last thing about using AI in education is that we've discovered that it can be individualized. So for our online platform, we can individualize every student's journey in the education process, and that's what we're developing at the moment. So if students come in with a certain eye for things. So let's say we've got a Japanese student that joins and, their culture is more kind of anime, then the system will be created around that student's mentality and that student's interest. So the entire education journey will help support what they're trying to achieve. Where the student sitting alongside them would perhaps have a completely different journey. Where now, as it sits and as we've experienced, all of us in the room, is that it was more of a kind of a herd mentality, that everyone was kind of moving along together and they would all do exactly the same thing. Where now we feel that using technology, we can individualize, every student's journey specifically and help support them not only from a creative point of view, but also psychologically and everything else. It is a very, very powerful medium to be able to support and encourage and mentor 24 hours a day, pretty much.
I think the individuation angle is it's great to point out, because I think in all art mediums there is the fear that we're heading towards like a common middle of slop, so to have the intention going in that that you want to understand what the student's intention and vision is, and have some sort of way to track whether they're achieving what their intention was, rather than just having a vague input and then being happy with what specific output comes out, and then discovering down the line everybody's getting something similar, because they're flattening down to this common denominator. So to start out with the idea that you have to know what your vision is, and then that the tools can be tailored to realize it. I'm quite curious about that. I didn't know that was something that was possible. Out of interest, would you say the main concern from students, I think I can probably guess the answer, but is it more the creative merits concern? Is it the ethical concern? Or is it about if we accept these tools at a school level, we're basically capitulating to the industry accepting it, and therefore we're going to eventually narrow the job pool? Which one of those concerns is foremost for students?
So I think it's all of those things, and there's sort of a tightrope that we walk. There's also the students who are genuinely concerned that because of AI, what they're studying is going to be irrelevant when they leave. And I think I sense this sort of, if we embrace it, are we not rushing toward our own redundancy? But I think the best way, or the most responsible way the school can approach this, is to equip the students with a canvas of tools that they can choose from. And in terms of their concerns, and they range, we have students who are sort of vehemently opposed simply because of the environmental impact. And then we have other students who are genuinely concerned ethically. How do we know where it's borrowing these things from that it's serving back to us? So it's many things. But I think the prevailing concern is that, like you say, if we capitulate, then is it all over? And I have to say, I can't imagine the world is going to sit back and go, well, we'll happily watch that stuff that was generated for us by robots. Because unless we resonate with it, unless we care about the characters, that's why we've always chosen to watch things, and why we rate one performance over another. I think what's happening to me right now, I'm sure everybody experiences this, so the first sort of 15 seconds you watch anything, it's just with like deep suspicion. It's like, what is this thing? Is this real? And then
my kids have started asking me, is it real? I'm waiting for the first moment when they look out at like an ocean view and ask me, is it real? They're just so used to being suspicious.
but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I feel like audiences are going to regulate this for us, and the demand for authenticity is already there. And so it really does kind of come down to, can we use these tools, these artificial tools, to create something authentic? I kind of see the irony in all of it. And if so, where and how in our pipelines? And in order to find that out, we have to experiment, we have to explore. And if we leave that to the sort of early adopter techno geeks, we might not make the discoveries that we all need to make as artists. And that's why I think it's important that there's some engagement and scrutiny now, and why we go and play in these buckets we're creating. You know, I have this idea, I don't know if I've told you this, but I was thinking about it. We could introduce physical sculpture into the curriculum and have the students sculpt characters from clay, and then photograph turnarounds of them and feed them to an AI and feed them a video reference performance, and watch that clay creation come to life, and test it quickly, test how those proportions work on the move, and then decide, do we want to adjust the design, or do we keep going? Because traditionally we would have had to wait for the 3D sculpt and then rig it and then try and pose it and then go, oh, these proportions are not great. So there are all kinds of opportunities here that I think will enable us to iterate and produce wonderful things that we perhaps would get to eventually. But the truth is, it's all about capitalism, and time is money. And the pressure that's on us is, well, studios are saying we have smaller budgets, so how can we produce this quality with less? Surely AI is an answer to our problem.
I like that idea about getting your hands dirty. There's nothing like clay to kind of engage you with a medium that we call 3D, and at the end of the day, it's all pixels, but we call it 3D. So
Exactly, it's stuck in a screen. Yeah. I really do believe that we can focus more on those fundamental principles, life drawing and sculpture, and because what you were saying right at the beginning about observation, there's no better way to get an eye for something than to make a drawing or a sculpture of it. And if we can remove that barrier some more in our process, I do think we will be equipping the next generation to produce art as opposed to what everyone's afraid of, this sort of generic result that comes from the average of everything.
Yeah, I strongly suspect that there's going to be a premium on authenticity, and that developing your artistic sense is going to be the differentiator. I think there's probably going to be a big push towards a kind of radical humanism, and I think for craftsmanship there will also be a new appetite for it. But the point I was making about capitulating was a little bit different or adjacent to that. It's not so much about audience taste as it is about how the industry is reforming, particularly with regard to jobs for juniors. I think that's the bit where, as a school, you've got certainly a voice and perhaps a responsibility to feed into the policy around this, and different countries are taking different measures to try and protect jobs. In South Africa, and I believe in China, you can't, for instance, be fired because your job can be done by an AI now, whereas in America, as you know, they're just doing loads of tech layoffs, and in some instances rehiring those people back when they realize the AIs actually can't do the jobs that they thought they could. But I think students are probably really concerned that not everybody can hit the ground running as a director with their own creative vision, who's now got mastery of all these tools, like Nuno's mentee, who's just like been waiting with his 18 stories that he can now finally produce. Some of them are going to be, people who wanted to slot into a system, learn the ropes, and work their way up, or perhaps just be what they call a wrist in France, like an executor for their career, which used to be possible, and now it's looking like there's going to be less of those roles. Bradley Stillwell, who did one of your interviews, did say, he made the point that there will be more studios because there's more power to creators. But nevertheless, each of those studios will probably be hiring fewer people. That's kind of inevitable as industry adopts these tools. So I wondered if, as a school, are you thinking about doing both, like both lobbying government to create protectionist policies around labor while also equipping students to understand the tools to give them the best chance of finding positions? Have you guys thought about that or talked about that at all? A couple of months ago, our government did gazette a bill around AI, and then, as you might remember, they had to retract it because it turned out that some of it was written by AI and some of its references were hallucinated, which is a very special South African moment. So I think now they've taken that back in-house. But the point is that they're now ready for comment from industry if they weren't before. So where are you guys on that? Like, what would you, if you could write that bill, what would you put in it?
Oh, Julia, this is something I think about all day, every day, 24 hours a day. And sadly, I don't think that there's an immediate solution. I really think we have to go through the motions and start understanding, how the industry kind of shapes. And there's only a handful of studios in South Africa that are most of them are curious. We ran a survey last year, and they're all curious. About 80% of them said that they're using some AI now, or they definitely wanting to use it in the next year or so. So every studio knows that it's going that way. And I think the perception now, and this is where I believe a lot of the anxieties are coming from, is because everyone's saying studios are going to become smaller, they're going to recruit less people. But my personal opinion is that at first that may happen, but then once studios discover how much content they could create, and that they could now tackle an entire series, for example, within a few months, then they are going to employ more people, because you're going to need the artists to run those workflows. And they're just going to have more productivity with less staff. So if we know how studios operate, especially the bigger studios, they need to keep the mass there to be able to run that organization. So I believe they're just going to be a lot a lot of content. When we look at the Disney pipeline, they take years to create a film like Moana. We're always fascinated by the size of their budgets, which for Africa, that can run a small country for a year. And they're doing that to produce a feature film. So I believe that in 10 years' time, there's going to be probably greater amounts of artists producing stuff because there's this urgent need for content. Then I think it will increase. The other point I'll make about content of the future is that Africa now is in a very, very competitive position. If they manage these new tools really carefully, they will get all of their shows signed off. We have done several journeys to festivals around the world, and we've come back very upset most of the time because we weren't able to sign, that amazing story that we developed for years on end because we didn't have the budget, we didn't have the manpower, and we couldn't compete globally. Where now, I believe we will be able to compete globally, not immediately, but in the next 10 years. And this is what I constantly tell people about animation school. We've done great things, but it's been 26 years and nothing happened overnight. It took years for us to develop our pipeline to be able to support Triggerfish and Sunrise with their production aspirations. So I believe it will change, and it's also going to give our graduates a wider spread in terms of their opportunities, because our pipeline has been geared for box office. If you watch our open day stream, you'll see that we have graduates working at every top title at the moment in the box office, and we're very proud of that. But now I believe that some graduates could team up with 4 or 5 of them, start their own studio, start doing infomercial, explainer videos, all that kind of stuff. We have emails almost on a monthly basis saying we've got a budget and we need this animation done for training videos, or we need it for this and that. And we always have to say to them, look, we can't do that. We're a school. Your budget is way too small. That needs to be 20 times higher if you want to use animation. And that was always very upsetting for us because we would drive people away from using animation. So I believe that in the future, we'll be able to use animation in more areas of the market, whether it's in advertising, education, infomercials, whatever the case is, that we can now use the medium as it was intended and not constantly make the excuse that, well, your budget's way too small, animation is super expensive, so rather go and do something else.
Okay. So do I understand, I'm hearing you correctly, that you believe market forces will, this will all kind of shake out without having to worry about introducing legislation or policies that will help to slow down this change in such a way that we can protect that junior tier? My thought was, for instance, by incentivizing productions that hire juniors or that don't replace juniors with AI, just to do something to protect that incoming tier. You don't think that's necessary because there will be so much content that's suddenly possible at smaller budgets?
I do agree that during the transitional period that we need to manage that very carefully, and that juniors will be allocated different tasks and they'll be doing different things. If legislation dictates that studios have to do a certain thing, it's going to suppress their ability to be able to produce stuff for a client. And as a school, it's always very tricky because the mentality as a scholar or as a student is that they're producing stuff for themselves, they're very ethical and moral, and they're very attached to their work. But as soon as they graduate, some of that does change because now they're producing stuff for a client, they're part of a bigger ecosystem, and they're still being creative, but it's not like they were as a student. And that's what I'm constantly trying to mentor them and saying, yes, it's okay to have this mentality now, but as soon as you step foot out there, you need to earn a living. So you need to do what you have to do what you love, but at the same time also understand that you are part of a system. And of course, if you've got the aptitude and the energy and the support, then go and do your own thing. And that's why we have a lot of our graduates over 26 years that have started their own studios and are very successful and do really well. So it's also about the type of person. Not everyone's going to be a director, as you were mentioning, and we don't expect them to be. But now I think the director role is surfacing more because I think it's appealing. But those directors will need people along. And that's why it's imperative that we continue conversations with studios that are producing animation using these tools, because that can really help us set up our 3-year pipeline. Like Tim was saying, we have to be 3 years ahead. And this is why we've made the decision to make the announcement now. And we knew it was going to be tough, but we are protecting the future artist. And parents at Open Days for 3 years have been asking us, what are you doing about AI? It's always a hard sell to convince parents, not all parents, I know that we're different, but most parents to go into the entertainment industry. And it's been a hard sell for 26 years, and now even more so. So now this is why we have to do that. I think Tim ran an Open Day recently where we introduced our new story and how we're doing things. And we ran the same one in Joburg, and we got very positive results from the crowd. There was a small minority that was still unhappy and uneasy, but we seem to be moving in the right direction now. So yeah, wish us luck.
I'll always wish you luck.
Thank you, Tuka.
You have that tension between the parent who's thinking like that, and then the student who, as an artist, perhaps does have a sort of a purist view. And so, you really do need to try and marry the two in this environment. And I think what we're hoping to do, I think the way Nuno described it, is sort of run these things in tandem, where there's the traditional and this exploration that's happening. And we know that the exploration is going to be evolving all the time. But relating to your earlier question, if the student is being prepared to be a cog in the old machine, and we try and legislate it to protect that job, the chances of that machine changing in 3 years' time into a different machine are so high, given the advances in the technology, that it really is irresponsible for us not to do our level best to track with it in whatever way we can. And by exposing the students to the traditional methodology and the evolving options that they have, they then get the choice. They can choose. I can see an economy here, I'm going to use it, or I've got this job and I now see an economy that they could use, and they can put it on the table. And I've heard employers saying they're actually looking for graduates like that who can help them solve these challenges, because they don't necessarily have the R&D time to do it, or they're in a situation where they can literally say, you know what, I tried that and it was so janky, we need to do this by hand because it's going to hurt us down the line. And so that information is super valuable, and I think that we're positioning ourselves to do that. I'm really hoping that we can create a culture that's playful and explorative. We don't have a sort of brand that needs to sell itself as everything's handmade. The brand is, we prepare you for the future and for the world that you're entering. I'd love to get to the place where the students are able to support one another, whether they're for it or against it. We really sort of try to build this culture of kindness, so that it is, at the end of the day, entertainment that we're creating here. And if it entertains and moves and stirs, then we're getting our job right.
I think because it's such a contentious moment, anybody who's dipping their toe in is putting themselves out for criticism. Our friend Hisku Hosing, who's, nothing if not a real artist who creates oil paintings and had integrated some AI into the workflow of his short film. And it kind of kills me that it's a short film, because they're not like big job spinners anyway. It's not like anybody was out of a job because he used AI in his film. It just wouldn't have been made without that. And he had like 80 people on it. So, but he was just the sacrificial goat because he was first there, and because they stuck their neck out and said they'd done this. I think, stories like that are unfortunate. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe any publicity is good publicity for a short film. But it's just unfortunate because he's using it in a way that I think is very artistic.
Exactly.
But there was this big walkout staged of his film in Annecy, and I'm sure this fight won't be the last fight in the South African scene. But there's never a reason not to be kind and to listen to one another. So I was wondering also if you will introduce new mechanisms of listening to student feedback as well. I thought the one point made by, I think, an ex-student, just in terms of his film was used with AI changes, I believe, for some marketing that you did. And he felt that that's something he should have been consulted on. So I thought, well, it's a fair point.
Yeah, just to unpack that story, what happens is that we like to use student work in our adverts, obviously. And this particular situation, Meta is now automatically animating some of the ads for you on your behalf. So whether you like it or not, it's a feature that is built in. Google's just introduced Nano Banana a couple of months ago into their advertising platform, so their Google Ads. So it's an automatic thing. You can click it. It adds a little bit more flair to your ads. And for most corporates and stuff, they think this is an added value. So when this came to our attention, I obviously looked at the two pieces and I put, side by side, and there was a gradual smile that they added to the character where it hadn't existed. In this case, we felt that there was a good foundation for the character, and we were using the character to promote. But of course, we have taken the stance now that we will make sure that none of the work that we publish online will be manipulated, and we will make sure that doesn't happen. We're having a very challenging time in our marketing department now, because alumni aren't only upset that some of their work might be manipulated very subtly, but they're now challenging us when we use existing student work that was produced traditionally to sell our AI product. So we are very stuck in the middle here. At one point we said, let's just use text for now. Let's not use any images, because if we take something from the internet, they immediately presume that it's generated, even if it is kind of an image bank image that we purchased, they still believe that it's generated. So it's a phase we're going through, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we are marketing to a specific sector of the market. And we understand that our alumni are unhappy with us, and they feel that we're making the wrong decision. But we're marketing to the students that are going to be facing this technology, whether they like it or not. And we're trying to unpack it for them. Tim's done a great job on campus to kind of sit with a lot of the students that are unhappy and try and explain to them that we're trying to do things for the greater good. And they mustn't forget what we've gone through in 26 years and how we've supported industry. And we will continue to do that. If industry was telling us not to do this, we wouldn't do it. But every professional we've spoken to has told us, be curious, introduce them to the products. And some of them are telling us, where are these people? Because we need them. We don't have time now to be rehashing our entire pipeline. If we have one catalyst coming into the system, then we could have that person working on new pipelines and workflows together with all the other artists. So it's something we have to work through, and hopefully we can achieve the goals that we set out to in the next few months.
Thanks. That's a great answer. I just wanted to touch on one other thing that came up previously, but we haven't really dug into it at all, which was the sustainability aspect. In Kelly's interview in your open day material, she mentioned that was the one she was most important to her, was encouraging students to use local tools wherever possible, and other ways in which the carbon cost can be offset. Is this something that you feel should be mandated by the school as opposed to students just being encouraged to go that way? Or do you have any other thoughts or perhaps parallels in what other schools are doing? Is there anything you'd like to add on that topic?
We definitely are hyper conscious that we need to be very cautious here and responsible. So we do have a policy, but in terms of how we legislate it, we haven't defined that clearly yet. And the truth is, we're busy just doing experimentations right now with the staff, because we don't have anything in the program. We're working out, what the current hardware that we're running can deal with, and whether we can do stuff offline as far as possible, and what that's going to look like. I suppose the stance is, yes, we understand how important it is to do this responsibly, but we don't have an outline yet, just a framework that we've loosely based on what Gobla are doing in terms of our policies. Okay. But we basically need to experience it in practice before we can really make concrete decisions on this.
I got super excited when I heard that Come For You could do local rendering. until I discovered the spec of hardware that you need to have. I mean, close to
Okay.
100,000 rands worth of equipment, for one workstation that would really give you reliable things. Then when I started chatting to industry, they said that it's so specific in terms of the card, and that they had two machines that were identical but were giving them two different results. So that did pose a problem. Some studios are saying go cloud rendering, because that's going to give the student also more ability in terms of being competitive, in that once they graduate, they don't need to invest a lot of money on hardware, and they could cost a lot of the job by then, that they would say, like, I'm going to need 20,000 tokens for this commercial, and that's what I'm going to cost the client. The other challenge we have is what happens when a student steps their foot off campus and they go home and they have access to these tools. It's not illegal. They have the capability of doing that. So, and they most certainly don't have, these expensive computers. So it's something we kind of toying with at the moment. I think the cost at the moment is very expensive because it's a new thing, and everyone's trying to jump on board. The data centers aren't established yet, so the price of the product is very high. We believe that it will change, the costing will change, and hopefully they are able to manage these data centers in a way that is environmentally friendly, and there is a lot of research going into that in terms of using solar and wind to try and reduce the carbon footprint for us. But we are very aware of that, and we hope to manage that. In our Cape Town campus, we have a solar plant with 133 panels. So I think that we are well within our carbon footprint, and it does a fantastic job, not only for our energy bill, but also run most of our computers all day. So we're most certainly aware of that. The carbon footprint, and creating a responsible artist that's not just generating for the sake of it. And that's why we said earlier that we will make sure that they're only going to go to the machine once their creative process has been outlined and they know exactly what they want the machine or the AI to do for them.
I think the last thing you said really resonates with me, because I think there's just such a temptation to go straight to the computer and iterate because you can, and suddenly everybody can. So I think the idea of telling students to use that tool sparingly and inculcate that culture in students means that when they do go home, they're just in that habit of only going to those tools once they've got a very clear idea of their intention, not only because it's more ethical, but because then they're going to be more in control of their artistic output. Just to close out, I wanted to ask if there's any one thing, what is the thing people misunderstand about your approach to AI as an educator? Is there any one thing that stands out?
Look, my biggest fear, Julia, is that artists in high school are going to abandon this career because they believe that the machine is going to take over. That is my biggest fear. And that's why we are aggressively campaigning to these high school scholars and to explain to them the world is changing quite significantly, but we have a solution. And that's what does frustrate me about the social media attacks, is that a majority of those people are making comment without listening to our story or our solution. So my biggest fear is that artists give up on art, and they give up on coming to animation school because they believe we're going to hit the button and it's going to create a feature film.
I've always come at this as an animator, started out in 2D and then 3D, specifically fascinated by performance more than anything else, story and performance. And for me, the jury's still out on how we're going to manage performance with AI, because right now you have to type your brief to your actor and then hope for the best. So currently the only alternative I can see is some sort of AI assisted motion capture, but that's still not the animation that I love. And so that's my biggest concern is, are we going to be calling it animation when it's not? And so I'm very interested in finding what the future technology does to unlock the control that I need as an animator of my character. And that's what my eye is on, and what I'm excited about exploring at the school with the students. I'm here to raise the bar of animation, and I don't want to have to close that door and go, oh, well, we can't do that anymore. That's why I've always been excited about this medium. So, yeah, I would say don't assume that because we're exploring AI that we've stopped loving this thing. In a way, it's a preservation. When Disney discovered that they could Xerox their drawings and didn't need ink artists anymore, a whole lot of people lost their jobs. But for the first time, the authenticity of that drawing found its way onto the screen because so much of its life was lost in the cleanup process. And so now we're sort of experiencing some sort of reversal where the how do we get the authenticity back? Where are the human inputs? And this is the thing that I'm excited about exploring with. If we can get control of all the human inputs, we can bring authenticity and soul into the work. And that's what's always excited me. And I'm not excited about soulless, lifeless performance that gets served up by a machine. I'm excited for a film that's going to move audiences, and I want to be part of helping students make one.
Brilliant. That's a really great note to end on. People who have been in the industry for so long and been through disruptions of similar magnitude, even if they didn't perhaps feel quite so existential as this one, to understand that, to weather these things, you have to understand what you're protecting and what you value.
Thank you for the opportunity, Julia. Let's all not forget that we remain artists regardless of the technology around us, and let's protect that.
For a closer look at what TAS has on the cards, check out their YouTube channel and keep an eye out for one of their frequent open days, also available virtually. I'm Julia Smuts-Lowe. Thanks for listening.